Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. This is part 4 in our special stat series called Into the Forest, where we will present a different angle or question each time, open it up for debate, and then hopefully agree, possibly disagree, potentially argue, and maybe even completely reject the topic entirely. There will be 5 episodes, and each of us are taking it in turns to present their idea or question and putting it to the panel before opening it up for debate. So, let me introduce today's panel. It is, of course, Richard Spray, Raf the Random Pundit, Dan Scape, and Paul Morley. And of course, you know me, I'm Greg Oram. Great to have you with us. Each speaker is going to have a chance to take the stage and present their findings to the panel. The rest of us will then be able to chip in at the end and have a bit of a chat about what we've witnessed. We want to try and keep these episodes short and sharp, so please strap yourselves in. And so, without further ado, let's get started, and I'll hand over for episode number 4 to...
I appreciate that. Yeah, great intro as always. And for my piece, I'm going to take on a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is that one Morgan Gibbs-White, and look at kind of how he's performed over the first 3 years of the season. So, or first 3 seasons in Premier League, rather. We know he's been with Wolves in the past, but he really didn't log many minutes, and so it's great to see him, obviously, in these last 3 seasons become a focal point. But we want to look at him statistically, in particular, compared to others. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at kind of how this is set up. So goal-creating actions is one category that we want to focus in on. Shot creating actions, shooting, passing, and possession. And what we're going to do is compare him, or what I'm going to do is compare him to the top attacking midfielders in the Premier League in their first 3 seasons, because we want to try to get at least a reasonable sample size, because, you know, it's something we probably don't think about because we just assume he's been around forever. Well, he hasn't. We're not even full through this first, the third season, rather, this current season, since we've been back in the Premier League. And so, you know, really, we're looking at basically a sample size of 2.5 from him compared to 3 from everybody else, but it's about as close as we can get at this stage. So we're going to have categories that you'll see on the screen, or we'll kind of reference, talking about the ages, or just at least you can see the ages of the players. So for example, it goes from alphabetical order: Eze, Foden, Madison, Odegaard, and Paquetá. Those are the individuals that I've chosen to kind of compare to get somewhat of a sample size of elite players that we know of right now, just in terms of how they're tiered and ranked, as well as those kind of in that mid to lower tier of players in the same position as Morgan. And again, we're looking at the first 3 years. So in the league. So we also I wanted to add in a point scale for the above categories. That point scale is basically going to be determined like this. You've got 5 points as the most one can achieve in any one area, statistical area. That's shown and visualized by a bright green color. The next one is 4 points. That's a kind of a standard green color. An olive green at 3 points, a light green at 2 points, a salmon pink color at 1 point, and if it's a light pink, it's 0 points. Then where you see something highlighted in a light yellow color, that generally means that there's been some progression in that category. And then if it's white, it's just a reference point. It's just informational for the purpose of showing you that within any given category. So let's look at the first category, which is that goal creating action. And when we say goal creating action, what I'm talking about is the 2 offensive actions directly leading to a goal, such as a pass, a take on, or maybe getting a foul. One thing to note when it comes to that, a single player can get credit for multiple actions that, you know, for someone who scores the goal. Or at least that leads to a goal, rather. So let's look at the different categories within this. So we're looking at goal creating action just as a summary overall. We're looking at take-ons, and then we're looking at goals and assists. So, and I've got those highlighted here on the screen for you in that light yellow color. So goal creating actions, if you're looking at this, you're looking at it from FBref's metrics, FBref.com, and they're per 90 metrics. So for example, on the goal creating actions, Morgan Gibbs-White as an average over the first 3 years. So we've got averages articulated for those players I mentioned, Eze, Foden, Madison, Odegaard, and Paquetá. We've got average for Morgan over the first 3 seasons, but we also show Morgan's first 3 years. So 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25, just to give an indication of how those things have progressed. So at certain points through this, this analysis, this assessment, I'll reference that there's been progression from year over year. And we may even look at some particular things in isolation that may change some of how he would be ranked in comparison to those other 5. So goal creating actions, 0.47 per 90 for his average for the first 3 years. That puts him at ranked third amongst this group. If you're looking at the current season, 0.54. That would actually put him at second. So you'll see some progress there just alone. Take-ons, not the most adept at this, unfortunately. So last 2 seasons, he's got a 0.00 logged. He's got a 0.03 logged on the first season, because we know he was a little bit bolder as a player in that first season. And that gives him an average of 0.01, which puts him at second to last. Surprisingly, it's second to last. But these are, again, take-ons that lead to a goal. So just keep that in mind, not take-ons in general. So goals overall, he's at a 0.17 as an average for his first 3 seasons, but this current season he's at 0.23. If you look at the 0.17 average, the 0.17 actually puts him at second to last. So he's 5th out of the 6 guys, out of 6 midfielders that are listed here. And then if you at 0.23, that 0.23 actually puts him in 4th. So he's increased his goal per 90 output, which is a good thing to see. His assists. This is something we very much are aware. I think he was in the top 3 to 5 in assists last season in the Premier League overall, which is great. He's at a 0.25 per 90 for his average over the first 3 seasons, and he's at a 0.23. So he's right about there. And so year over year, that hasn't changed significantly, not materially, which is not bad. You want to keep seeing him get roughly 10 assists per season, which he's on track to do that again this season as he did last season. So 0.25 per 90 actually puts him at second highest amongst these 6, which is great to see. Overall, for all of these categories that I just mentioned, just goal creating actions in general, he's ranked 4th overall. But if you're looking at the current season on isolation, he would be ranked second behind Foden. So that's great advancement there. We're going to look at shot creating actions. This essentially means the 2 offensive actions directly leading to a shot. So we looked at, offensive actions directly leading to goal. Now we're looking at offensive actions directly leading to a shot. So shot creating actions, we're looking at the overall shot creating actions, and then we're going to look at take-ons, because some of these categories you might see our focus in terms of what's highlighted is really oriented around the idea that he can't really impact those metrics significantly because there's so many variables that might play into that, but he can take people on. As an attacking midfielder, I think we want to see him do that. And so when you look at shot creating actions overall, his average over per 90 over the first 3 seasons, he's at 3.96, which puts him at 4th out of the 6, but he's at 4.02 now, which actually keeps him in that same number, but you're still seeing a higher number just this season alone than his overall average. Take-ons, he's at 0.24 per 90 for the first 3 seasons. That's not tops by any means, but it's about 4th out of the 6. So overall ranking for all these categories, he's at 4th. The next category we want to review is shooting. So total number shot, shots on target percentage, goals per shot on target, and then XG or expected goals. So when we go down through those lists of different categories that fall into the shooting, quote unquote, shooting overall categories, so these subcategories, overall shots, he's at 1.91 per 90, which puts him at 4th amongst these 6. But he's at a 2.02, which that 2.02 would actually put him at 3rd. So he would be higher if it were going by just this season alone. Shots on target, he's at 0.65 per 90, which puts him at 4th, or excuse me, 4th amongst these players. It's not bad amongst the 6, but he would be at a 1.01 this season. So he's actually increased his shots on target, which is good to see. And if he was at a 1.01, that would actually put him in 2nd amongst all these players. So great to see him kind of doing a little bit more from a shooting standpoint and getting them on target. Now, granted, you have to take into account that he could be shooting from a distance and still be somewhat accurate, but the likelihood of that becoming a goal is probably not high if his distance is too far, obviously, from goal. But shots on target percentage, he's at 33.97% accuracy there for his first 3 seasons, and that puts him at second amongst these 6. But if you looked at this season alone at 50%, that would put him at tops in amongst these 6, which is good to see. Goals per shot, he's at 0.08 per 90, which would put him in 5th or second to last. Goals per shot on target, he's at 0.23, which would put him at, unfortunately, last amongst these players for his first 3 seasons. And then his XG is at 0.17, which puts him at 4th amongst these players. Overall ranking, he's at 5th. But if you look at the current season again, putting those in a points total, he actually would be ranked at the top amongst all these players, which is pretty remarkable from a shooting standpoint. All right, so then we're going to shift to passing. So passing is typically what I associate Morgan with. We probably all associate with him with, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's a key part of his game and key part of playing that position. So the categories we're going to look at are passing completion percentage, short completion percentage. So when a short completion percentage means anything under 15 yards, from a distance standpoint, medium completion percentage is 15 to 30 yards. Long completion percentage is at 30 yards. We're going to look at subcategory types of passes like through balls, switches, passes offside, or passes blocked. So obviously offsides are a little bit tricky because the timing of those things, to a degree, you can maybe look at that category. We're going to include it for the purpose of this exercise, but so much is dependent on what the other player does and the timing of what that other player does. But passes blocked to me are important because did he put it in a position where it could have been intercepted? Right? Or it could have been impeded in some way. So it goes to the accuracy of the pass. XA is your expected assists. XAG is your expected assists that lead to a goal. Key passes are anything that leads to a shot. Passes into the final third, passes into the penalty area, crosses into the penalty area, and progressive passes, which basically means anything where you were able to pass the ball into that penalty area, or at least advance the ball 10 yards towards the goal, towards the penalty area, excuse me. So when we start going through all those categories, we'll start from the top again at the passing completion percentage. He's at 69.90%, which puts him at last amongst the 6. He's at 78% though this season, so he significantly improved that from year over year, which is a good thing to see. Short passes, he's at 80.77 per 90 percent from a completion percentage standpoint. That puts him at second to last, or excuse me, that puts him at last in that category. Medium completion percentage. And just stepping back for a second, but his short completion percentage has now gone up to 85.1. So that's significantly better than where it was, which would move him out of last place in that category. His medium completion percentage is at 78.2. That puts him at last, but it's at 79.7 this season. So he's continuing to get better at that. Long completion percentage is actually, he's pretty good at this, 51.30 per 90 from a percentage standpoint. And that puts him in third. But if you were to look at this season alone, that he's at 66% accuracy in that category. And again, that's more than 30 yards. So that's a much more difficult pass to achieve. That actually puts him at the top. So he would be the number 1 out of the 6 in that category, just based off of this season alone. Through balls, 0.63 per 90 over the first 3 seasons. That puts him at second. But if you moved him to 0.93, which is what is currently, or rather, if you were to look at this season, rather, at per 90 at 0.93, that would actually put him at the top amongst all these players from a through ball perspective. Switches, he's at 0.37 for per 90 for the first 3 seasons. That 0.37 actually puts him at second amongst all of these players. And what that means is that he's basically, and you've seen him do this regularly, he's going to take the ball from one direction, could be from a sideline or another midfielder, from Wood passing it back to him, however that works, on a certain side of the pitch. Then he's going to turn and he's going to switch the flow of play because he sees opportunities on the other side. So we've seen him do that quite regularly. You can think of a ball coming from Yates or coming from Alanga or coming from Dominguez on the right. He gets the ball in the middle, he turns right, and then immediately looks over and he sees either Anderson or he sees Callum advancing or Nico advancing, and we've seen him use the outside of his foot quite regularly. And then he gets the ball over to one of those players. So he's very adept at that, which we know. So it's not a surprise that he's second amongst these guys in terms of his ranking. Passes offside, he's the worst. Passes blocked, he's actually pretty good at this. So that means he's pretty accurate. He's not allowing things to get intercepted. So that's at 0.92 per 90. That's actually second best in the Premier League. So That's good. Or excuse me, second best amongst these 6. XA, he's at 0.24 per 90. That puts him at second best. Key passes, which essentially is passes that lead to a shot. That's 2.04, which is, about fourth amongst these 6, which isn't bad. He's about the same amount. Passes into the final third, he's at 3.55 per 90. That puts him at fourth among the 6. Passes into penalty area, 1.21 per 90. That's actually fourth among the 6, but he's increased that to 1.32. So if it were 1.32, that would actually put him in third amongst these players. Or rather, I'm sorry, that actually is an improvement in terms of overall number, but it still keeps him in fourth and from a ranking standpoint. Crosses into the penalty area. This is actually something that he's doing really well. 0.23 per 90. You could think of, Chris Wood's receipt of that ball from him, that chip pass last season where against Crystal Palace, where it was just perfectly, it was highly accurate, perfect, weight and trajectory and angle and everything that allowed Chris to turn that header and to loop that ball over Dean Henderson for a goal against Crystal Palace that tied that match. Pivotal moment, pivotal goal. Morgan Gibbs-White, that's just one illustration of his crosses into the penalty area. He's at 0.23 per 90. Like I mentioned, that puts him at tops amongst the rest of these guys. So it's great to see. Progressive passes, which again, moving the ball at least 10 yards, advancing at least 10 yards within 6 passes to get it into the penalty area, or passes into the penalty area in and of itself. He's at 4.72 per 90, which that actually puts him at third amongst all of these players. But this season alone, he's at 5.35 per 90, which that actually would be the second best amongst these players if you were to look at that. So progressive passes. He ranks 5th overall, looking at the points total based off of averages over the first 3 seasons compared to the others, but he's actually going to be ranked 3rd if you look at this season's numbers in isolation. So that's passing. Now we're going to move on to possession. We're not a high possession team, so this is a difficult one. But at least his ability to retain possession into some degree or other elements of possession that we want to focus in on. So take on success percentage. How well does he take on opposing players and not get tackled, basically? And then we've also got take on tackle percentage. So how many times does he get tackled? Or some other thing happens on the success percentage, like maybe he loses control of the ball, gets, not just dispossessed or tackled, but he might lose control of the ball. So take on success percentage, take on tackle percentage, progressive carries, final third, carries into the final third, carries into the penalty area, missed controls, and dispossession. So if we look at take on success percentage, he's at 45.37 per 90 in his first 3 seasons. That's the worst amongst these 6. Take on tackle percentage, 45.60% of the time he's getting tackled. That is going to be the worst amongst these 6. Progressive carries, which again is advancing it towards the penalty area. He's actually at 2.39 per 90. And that's 3rd amongst these players. He would be at 2.79 if you look at this current season, which actually means that he would be 2nd amongst these players in terms of progressive carries. Final third carries, he's at 1.89 per 90, which puts him at 4th amongst the 6. But he's actually at a 2.02 this season, which still keeps him around 4th, but he's still getting better at it in terms of getting the ball into that final third. Carries into the penalty area, 0.49 per 90. That puts him at 4th amongst the 6. Miscontrols, he's actually 2nd worst in this category at 2.41 per 90. And then dispossessions, he's at 1.42, which puts him at 4th amongst the 6. So in this category, which shouldn't shock anybody, the worst in this category is Eperechi Eze, which that style of player, you've all watched him play in some degree. I'm sure you know kind of how he operates in that position. That's a little bit different than Morgan. So he's 2nd worst, and then the worst is actually Paquetá at this particular metric. So they get dispossessed quite frequently amongst per 90. All right, so let's just summarize what we've just discussed. So if you add all those points totals up per category, all those points totals lead to him being ranked 4th. So he's at 80 points. So you've got Phil Foden at 135. You've got Madison at 115 points. You've got Odegaard at 106. So those are the top 3. Then you've got Morgan. Then you have Eze and Paquetá, which are pretty much neck and neck. So 4th, not bad. I mean, he's obviously still got plenty of the season left to improve those metrics, as well as plenty of career ahead of him to try to continue to improve those metrics compared to these other guys. I mean, someone like Phil Foden, for example, you think he's still really young, obviously, but he's been in the league 7 seasons. So, but in his first 3 seasons, he's still pretty elite, right? It didn't take him long to get to the top of a lot of these categories and to show why he's probably one of, if not the best number 10 in the league, especially when considering, like I mentioned earlier, he was the Premier League player of the season last year. So here's some areas of strengths, either areas where we've seen him progress year over year or areas where he maybe is in the top 3 amongst all of these players. Goal creating actions, great thing to see. Shots and shots on target, medium and long passes, through balls, switching passes, goals per shot, assists leading to goals, that XAG number, like I mentioned earlier, passes into the final third, key passes or passes leading to a shot, and progressive passes that advance play into the penalty area specifically. So good things to see from how he plays. You could make the argument he could be a number 10, he could be a number 8, somewhere in between. I'm sure it's going to be very fluid for Nuno, especially with, like I mentioned earlier, with Anderson's presence now on the team. But it's great to see that Morgan has done well in terms of increasing the output and the results in some of these key metrics, but also, and being favorable in some of them, especially in areas like assists, compared to everybody else and compared to the rest of the Premier League. So great things ahead of him. I have no doubt from Morgan Gibbs-White. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Richard. I mean, I guess your question at the start is Morgan Gibbs-White our number 10? And I think, if I'm honest with you, looking at the data you presented, for me, the answer is no. I mean, I'm shocked, to be honest with you. Obviously, you're comparing him against a certain set of players. And so if you take the whole Premier League into consideration and you compare him against every single number 10, per se, in teams, then I don't know where he'd come. But it's less encouraging than I thought it was going to be. Again, just kind of highlights to me that what you see and what you feel and what you watch is one thing, and the data often tells a different story. So I guess the question that you asked with a very quick answer is no, he's not a number 10. Elliot Anderson's got to be our number 10 because he takes players on. He's got, when he's in the box, he's doing all kinds of stuff. So the eye test is telling me that if I'm comparing the stats into the mix as well, that maybe he's not a number 10. What do you think, Dan?
I think you're taking the numbers too literally from my experience of looking at these kind of numbers, basically. I'll shock you and say I'm not really a fan of stats for individual players because there's so much context around it. There's the style of play of the team. There's the job they're being asked to do for that team. There's just the quality of the team. I mean, I think it's a little bit unfair to compare him to like Foden and Odegaard in a team that's just going to dominate the ball. Teams are going to sit off and allow them to do what they want to do. So yeah, there's some stats in there I think are meritable about take-ons and that side of it. I think he can definitely improve on. But I think a lot of the other stats to rank overall, I think you're just seeing that those players play for better teams, basically. And I think that's why it's hard with individual player stats, especially the less you know about the other players as well. And I think what proves that is the fact he's tied with Paqueta, who at West Ham will be playing for the most similar team to us because under Moyes, they were very direct, didn't have a lot of possession. So I think the reason he's tied with him is because the teams that they play in are of a similar style. I mean, the other thing that jumps out to me is that Eze would be such a brilliant partner for Morgan Gibbs-White as a stand-in because they're the exact opposite kind of number 10s. And I was thinking this when I've watched them recently, is that Gibbs-White is all about possession and helping helping build it within the team, create chances, whereas Eze is a complete, I'm just going to dribble and shoot here. And I think if you had those two as a swap in and out, that would be a brilliant combination. And I think Elliot Anderson's a little bit more like that. But, I think until you've seen Anderson play that role regularly and against some of those tough opposition teams, how his stats really compare at that point would be more fair.
Paul, I'll come to you next. I'm going to leave Raf until the end because he's had plenty to say on Morgan. I'm going to leave him till the end. But Paul, I'll let you come in.
Similar observations to what Dan just said, really. I think, if you think about probably the average possession stat for Forest over those 3 years has been, I'd imagine, somewhere around 40%, if that. And Foden's probably in a team that's, got 60, 65, maybe even 70% possession. So really difficult. I guess the question I would pose is, what would Foden's stats look like if he'd been playing for Forest for the last 3 years? And what would Morgan's stats look like if he'd been playing for City for the last 3 years? And obviously it's a question that none of us are going to know the answer to. But I think you'd find that Morgan's stats would look more favourable had he been playing for a team that had won the league for the last 3 years than a team that had finished 16th, 17th, and obviously this season doing a bit better. But it's still fascinating nonetheless, and some really interesting things there to go and think about. I think when it comes to the whole Anderson Gibbs-White debate, I just think Anderson is our most complete midfield player. And this is a strange thing to say, but almost would he be wasted in the 10 because you'd lose? I think the last couple of games he's won the most duels, the most tackles. That dynamism that he brings, you just saw the way he won the ball back from Cash the other night. That sort of combative element of his game would we miss out on if we switch those two around? And I think Anderson in the middle of the park just has so much to offer that I'd be loath to pigeonhole him as a number 10 because I think he can do so much more than that.
It's an interesting question, and one that, Raph, I think you've been pushing forward with Anderson and Gibbs-White switching their roles. And I've mentioned the idea of them doing it in game to try and have that kind of interchangeability. So, Raph, you've got your chance now to respond to Richard's presentation.
Really interesting. Now, anyone who's been following me on Twitter or generally been listening to me here on this pod will know that I'm probably one of the fiercest critics of Morgan Gibbs-White, even though I love him. I really want him to succeed, and I do want him to be our number 10 and us build a team around him. It's just simply not been good enough, and not consistent enough from him. He shines brightly and then he is terrible, and that is all in one game. And we just need more from him. But looking at that, I think I am less damning than Greg about the actual situation around Morgan Gibbs-White. And that's what I love these pieces, because, Rich, you've given me a whole wealth of data, gone through it, and actually highlighted bits and pieces. And I've tried to join a few things together that I'm going to quickly go through to explain what I'm, as a bit of challenge, and you think if I'm right or not. So, to take Paul's point, it is really valid as to the amount of possession you've got in a game. So the amount of shots that you're going to be having and all of those types of metrics of volumes of things are all going to be out of whack. So we've got to really kind of discount some of those things. But the metrics that are good for me are percentages of things and of your goals, what percentage you're on target, what's your ratio of scoring with your shots and things like that. I love those types of stats. What I will call out, though, is even in the volume ones, though, when Morgan shines, he shines. And the things like through balls and creating things and what I call the high risk pass, switching the ball, through balls, all that stuff, he was at the top end, right? At the top end for those things. So it validates when he's on, and he's the one that is going to cause something to happen, which the rest of the team do it. And I actually think the last game at Villa is such a good summary of all about Morgan Gibbs-White, because he was frightful in the first half. I'm sorry, he just was. He lost the ball 4 times, right? And it's awful. But he was the spark that basically created us winning, which was absolutely, there were lots of other performances in there, but he was instrumental in a lot of what happened. The thing that worries me, though, getting into a couple of these stats, right, is, and they are getting better, and his shooting is getting better, but it is, because he's got less shots, he's not as far off as I thought the others in their early stages of their careers with his shooting. So that gives me a little bit more promise, but that is one of the areas that he definitely has to improve on. What's seriously concerning is his short passing being miles last. And like 1 in 5 short passes goes awry. And you cannot have that for someone in his game that's is known for passing. And it's that due care with the ball that has to dramatically improve. But the stat I found really surprising, when you think about it, Anderson's the one that runs with the ball. Morgan Gibbs-White is the one that distributes it and passes. But actually, compared to the others, his progressive carries with the ball were better than the other 5, and pretty much right up the top with his ball carrying, which is not what I remember about him at all. So maybe it's actually just doing a bit more of the ball carrying and being a bit more precious with the ball where he's got it and you will see him improve a lot more with his shooting. But I'm not as completely disconsolate seeing all of those stats. I think there's the foundations there of someone that can grow massively in the next 2 years into being an exemplary player. That will be really, really, really good for us. So it's not all doom and gloom, but there are some serious areas in there that are concerning for where we are when we actually have him as the central point of our team, that he does need to fix quickly, or you will find this grating fan noise about him, which is not what we need, because I think probably he's a confidence player.
Thanks, Raf. That's a really good summary. Paul, you're on mute, buddy. You're on mute, buddy. You're on mute. And Richard's going to edit that bit out. Paul, what were you saying, Paul?
I just want to jump in on the short passing point that Raf made there. And I've got no necessarily data to back this up, but it's more of a hunch. And that when you think most of the short passes probably that Morgan tries to play, and when we are springing a counter-attack, it's fired into him, he's looking for the quick touch off and go. Whereas Odegaard, for example, most of his short passes will be at a walking pace where the opposition is sat on the edge of their own box. He's playing it to Saka. Saka's playing it back to him. He's playing it to Saka. For 5 minutes, they're doing ticky-tacky to each other, and there's no pressure on him. So I think it comes back to that whole possession style of play thing. That will still impact some of that sort of stuff. I know what you're saying. It impact volumes probably more, but I think it does impact. It is going to impact that percentage success. And without getting into going down a historical tete-a-tete that we saw in another podcast about how much Morgan puts the ball at risk compared to Mangala, I think it was, that we all can remember. I think that there is a difference in what Morgan's being asked to do in the situations he is receiving the ball in compared to some of those other guys that he's been compared to.
I think if you want a team that's really good at short passes, is Southampton. And do we want to be Southampton?
Exactly. Thanks, guys. Absolutely brilliant discussion. Richard, thank you so much for your data analysis and stats on Morgan Gibbs-White. He's a fantastic player. The eye test really is something I put first and foremost, to be honest with you. So, I was being a little bit of a yin to your yang with the question answer of no, he's not going to be on number 10. Of course he is. Elliot Anderson, a fantastic player. We're lucky to have both of them. If you've enjoyed watching this part 4 of our series on stats called Into the Forest, then please do hit the like button and join us and subscribe as well. Got one more episode to come, so come and join us next time.